A bell tolls as dusk hunches over the river, and rain begins to smear the oilskin tents that line the quay. Water pours in silver sheets from a timbered spout. It hisses into a stone trough, and the city seems to breathe for a moment, a soft inhalation after the long business of hunger and heat. A woman lifts a pail from the curb. The wood is dark with moss, the rim furred with riverweed, and when she sets the pail beneath the spout, her hands, remember, cold like a map, knuckles scored by winters, a thumb calloused where the rope sat. The moment is small, private, ritual. The conduit is a public miracle, a thin vein pulled from a distant spring into the crowded bone of the streets. The spout is also theater. Boys cup water and laugh under the stone lip. Merchants hold coin to the stream and rub it clean, as if to wash the city's accounts. A priest rinses his fingers before a procession and breathes a prayer into a cup. Conduits are places where gossip takes shape and where the civic body meets the private body. Some conduits are grand, housed beneath carved masonry and named for benefactors whose initials persist like carved scars. Others are nothing more than a patched trough flanked by a wooden tap. The great conduit, the artery brought from Tyburn into Cheapside, became the city's public heart. People came to draw, to watch, and, in certain hours of festival, to celebrate a city that gave water for free. Below the laughter and the blessing lies the engineering, the long, tactile labor of men who coaxed springs into service. Pipes were made in different ways. Lead channels where gravity could be trusted. Wooden trunks where timber outlived the purse, and joints were sealed with pitch and heated metal, perhaps that left the hands black and smelling of tar. Building of a conduit was a cross-guild act. Carpenters, smiths, and masons riding their skill into the ground. These choices mattered. The city's life hung on a network of materials and decisions. Wood and lead performed a delicate dance of utility and danger. The same metals and beams that brought ease could, by mischance, carry rot and sickness deeper than any thief could steal. There is a civic choreography to water. Wardens were appointed to keep watch over the supply, to record thefts, and to punish those who tapped the line without leave. Water carriers, cobs, and porters ran the arteries into homes that could not gravity feed. The shoulders curved under barrels like a secret that kept the city alive. Access was a kind of law. Not all who wanted could take freely, and so markets of exchange grew up around the troughs. The poor drew from painted stone. The merchant might pay for a private feed. The baker and brewer counted their measures with the same eyes that watched for spoilage. In winter, when frost cracked pipes, and in plague times, when the invisible fouling of a well-spread rumor into terror, these systems revealed their true cost, the thin margin that separated a district from sickness or calm. Once, on days of coronation or blessing, the city would change the music of its fountains. Wine, not only water, could be made to run for a pageant, an extravagant inversion that turned civic plumbing into a river of celebration. It was a gesture meant to mark the extraordinary. The same channels that carried common draft could be, for a time, consecrated into abundance. And the sight of red spilling into stone troughs was a language of power and of communal delight. Such largesse was a promise, and promises in stone ask for memory in return. To live near a conduit is to feel the city's pulse. In homes close to the spout, stew simmers with a steadier hand. Laundresses beat linens with less care for stormwater. Barbers and apothecaries measure their craft with a pitcher by the door. But the same water is fragile. A well dug too near a latrine. A winter freeze that shatters a lead joint. A butcher's washings run poorly and find the wrong stream. Any of these small failures can set a neighborhood's throat to coughing and brow to fever. The city's hygiene is not a single law, but a palimpsest of practices. Where to situate a privy, how deep to sink a cistern, the hours a well may be drawn, all the small ordinances that read like a people's secret code against pestilence. There is intimacy in the domestic acts that follow the public spout. A child cupping water into palms and tasting light metal on his tongue. A widow rinsing a single cup with a precision born of scarcity. A neighbor offering a spare pail because the conduit's keeper has gone away. These gestures are the spineless architecture of survival, less visible than the troughs and pipes, but no less structural. The water is braided into the day. It colors prayers before the feast. It cools a fevered brow at midnight. It turns flour to dough in the hands of those who will feed a family tomorrow. Every drop bears memory of a wedding basin, of a salt-stained hand, of the last clean cup before a sickness came. The making and mending of water systems is also a story of salvage and stubbornness. When a pipe breaks, the city summons muscle and cunning. Men lower into trenches, pitch sputters on gloved palms, and adze steals a splinter of wood to make a sleeve. They seal with heated lead or wedge a wooden joint with skill and prayer. They return their artery to the city like a surgeon. After repairs come small ceremonies, a child given the first draft, a neighbor who brings bread to the workmen. These are the quiet bargains that stitch together neighborhoods, the small economies that trade labor for breath. At the edge of these civic labors, there is always a shadow, the awareness that the same water that gives can also take. Tales travel faster than tradesmen, of a spring fouled by careless privy, of fever blooming through a block whose well was mislaid, of a city that learned the cost of neglect when night soil pooled and the air itself seemed to carry something heavier than scent. The conduit is this memory made practical, an attempt to hold back decay by the slow, expensive care of craft and counsel. It is both defiance and humility, a public thing that demands constant tending. So the woman draws her pail and presses her lips to the wooden rim, tasting the cold as if to read some future in its bite. Around her, the city goes about its liturgies, bell, cart, sermon, market cry. Water threads the mall, a silent current under the louder life. In the hush, after the draw, someone will close a ledger, someone will patch a joint, and a child will tuck a clay whistle into pocket. The conduit rests like an artery under the streets. Tay and we, who watch and listen, learn that a city is not only built of stone and law, but of the nameless small mercies, a cup washed, pail filled, a hand offered that let people wake. To another day, the bell will toll again, and the rain will hush. Beyond the river, other hazards gather fire that loves tendered eaves, markets packed with hunger, laws that name who may draw and who must wait. What sustains is also what will be contested. We follow the thread of water through the city. Now, but the next hour will ask of the city another making, the handling of its waste, the management of refuse, the invisible trades that turn offal to resource and filth to fuel. The conduit has given us a breath. The city must now reckon with what it sends away. A distant hammer echoes through fog-draped lanes as dawn seeps into the city's hushed bones. Here, at the edge of the square, a woman lifts a sodden basket of refuse onto a cart's brittle wood. The weight in her arms is soft, mute testament to yesterday's meals, a loaf eaten down to crust, onion skins curled like brittle petals, a small heap of bones bleached by sun and scavengers. The air tastes of rot and rain, and under the muffled toll of a bell, she steps forward into the morning's gray hush. The city exhales its refuse. Once beyond the shadow of houses, there is expelled the waste of existence, scraps of cloth stained with sweat, a broken kilned pot, the husks of fruit turned musty. In quieter hours, the refuse is fed to animals tethered nearby pigs rooting at rotted scraps. A dog nosing at cast-off marrow so that the detritus of consumption becomes the breath of survival elsewhere. Other waste is buried in shallow pits, or deliberately mapped dumps beyond the city walls, where refuse accumulates like pale memory soil, layered with the unspoken history of the poor. The tangled remnants of daily life. In the city's darker alleys, there are those whose hands bear the weight of the city's shame. Nighthawks, in the truest sense. Sweepers who tread the gutters after markets and fairs. Carting off the built-up grit, the tang of fish and tendons, the midday fruits of trades. At worst of all, the gong farmers who descend with buckets and shovels into the bowels of cesspits where human refuse pools in darkness. They work by lamplight under a sky unmoved by human toil, drawing out what the city simply cannot bear within. Their wages are good, their work cursed. The stink clings to their coats, and their names vanish with the night. The rules of the city insist that no one may pour filth onto street or into the river without penalty. Fines are levied, orders are posted. Keep the forecourt of your home clean. Purge, refuse only by permission. Cart it beyond walls, bury or burn. But laws may bend in hunger or fatigue. Still, civic will is there, the deliberate carving of responsibility into stone and decree. Cesspits lie beneath floors or behind hovels, sometimes fitted with wooden chutes to ease the falling refuse, sometimes designed to drain away the worst liquids into the earth. Cesspits must be emptied every few years, and then the earth is turned, pits refilled, and new ones dug. In castles, garderobes sent flesh and filth directly outside their walls accrued, drop into moat. A private act with public consequence. In towns' privies, clustered in alleys behind walls, where the night must bear what daylight cannot show. And yet, in this act of casting away lies creativity. Bones become lime, burned to serve as mortars or fertilizer. Ash from hearths is used to bleach rags or launder cloth, turned back toward the loom. Scraps of metal are hammered anew. The city spins its clemency into small economies. Refuse becomes fuel, compost, patchwork, and the architecture of survival. Trades intersect. Tanners feed, hide with awful fields. Beyond the moat, drink the water of excrement as grain trinkies. In their turn, and the refuse pits become the dark roots of the places that bloom above. As the cart rumbles homeward, the city breathes again on cleaner pavement. A child plays by the curb, unseeing of what was carried off. A butcher wipes his cleaver. Townspeople step over a damp hoof, and somewhere bells mark the next hour. We have followed the journey of waste from intimacy to distance, from underside to open, and now the city shifts its breath again. Tomorrow. Fire threatens the city's structure, its life, its fragile alliances tested on a different edge. The ruin of flame will demand its own reckoning. How to destroy without eroding. How to rebuild without forgetting. How to transform danger into defense. The fog lifts, but a new tension gathers at the edges of lanes. The city, having relinquished its refuse, stands poised before the conflagration that will redefine what must be guarded and what may be sacrificed. A scream fractures the dusk, a torch falls into dry straw, and shadows erupt into flame. The night devours itself, and the whisper of smoke curls through timbered eaves. A child wails in the courtyard. The kettle's handle turns molten and drips onto cracked stone. This is no distant danger, is the flame's hungry tongue pressed against the city's throat. In these lanes, water is scarce. Buckets hang heavy at thresholds, every home obliged to host its own silent sentinel. When fire strikes, the city becomes human artery, a living chain of hands passing water in leather or wooden buckets from river mouth to blaze. Each bucket's swing carries grief and hope. They pass from neighbor to neighbor with no ceremony, but with urgent devotion. Palms blister, ropes chafe, water spills, but each drop fights. Each hand insists. Next come the firehooks, long poles, tipped with iron, grasping at eaves, pulling down burning thatch. and controlled collapse. Hooked timber spirals into the night. Fragments of roof tumbling in sparks. Each tug is a prayer of sacrifice. One house sacrificed to spare the next. Nails and splinters rain onto the earth. The clang of metal against wood echoes like a dirge through the smoke. Watchmen ring bells with a solemn rhythm. They're told warning a pulse you feel in your chest. The bell summons every soul, merchant and maid, child and beggar, all drawn by the pale threat. Some come with buckets, others with ropes and blankets to beat embers. Every pair of hands becomes a weapon against the incineration of lives and stories. There is no guild of firefighters, here only neighbors, tethered by fear and loyalty. Brewers stand beside barbers, each remembering that their wares could become kindling. Kitchens empty, tables abandoned mid-service. A mother clutches her child's doll in a scorched cloak. A keeper of records throws scrolls into the river, knowing their ink will bleed, but that memory must outlive parchment. The fire devours, but also teaches. Smoke teaches caution. Charred wood teaches solidarity. In the minutes that stretch like hours, the city's vanity dissolves. Wealth doesn't matter, only breath and solidarity. A ragged line of villagers forms a final bucket chain, chests heaving, eyes wide with raw clarity. As the blaze weakens, the smoke clears. Ash drifts down like pale snow, and the night exhales. A chapel's bell sounds not for alarm this time, but for mourning, the loss of hearth and story, the fragile mercy that survives. In that hush, hands still tremble. A child steps into the ruin and lifts a scorched spoon. A woman kneels at a warped post and touches soot, grain by grain. The city has been marked, its flesh branded by flame, yet its pulse remains, faint and persistent. Beyond the charred street lies the next reckoning, restoration, lawmaking, new boundaries drawn not only in sand and stone, but in trust and vigilance. The charred bones of one home will become mortar for another. From shivering ruin, the city must learn to breathe again. And so the ember's light fades, yielding to something quieter but no less urgent. Tomorrow, the city will need its voice. It will need to say, we will rebuild, and in rebuilding, we will remember. The night settles heavy, and the next chapter waits in the ember's glow. A sudden hush falls as the rain finally stops, and dawn's pale light reveals the damp bones of the streets. Where once water flowed in purpose, here lies a different current, one of waste and decay. A malodorous tide pooling in gutters and beneath doorways. The city exhales its refuse this dawn. The hush is not comfort, but a requiem for all that was consumed and expelled in the half-light. A figure emerges, silent, methodical, essential. The gong farmer walks with measured steps, his lantern swinging low, his shoulders bent, not under tools, but under the weight of necessity. He descends into the cesspit's opening, the odor a tangible wall that closes upon his throat. There is no ceremony here, just the sickly press of darkness, the reverberating drip of drainage leaking from a stone-lined pit, and the churn of human excrement being heaved into barrels. He works at night, and by law, he must. In those hours, the air is less intolerable, and the city's shame is hidden. But still, the stench sticks to him coarse, placabland. The darkness becomes ritual, around him, above. The walls of tenements and taverns bear the weight of waste, owed and deferred. In homes, privies open into shallow cesspits, so some are bound by wooden chutes that channel night's offerings downward. Others empty into the soil, where liquid seeps past earthy brick sand, often into wells, where it carries fever and nameless grief. When these pits fill, as they always must, only the gong farmer's tools, shovel, bucket, cart stand between disease and silence. He is both reviled and paid. His wages are high, his reputation low. Yet waste is also a resource. Teas and farmers await the barrels emptied at Dung Wharf, where barges slide along the darker currents of the Thames. This filth becomes fertilizer, bones burned into lime, excrement into nourishments, spreading outward and returning life to worn soils. It is circular economy, grotesque and profound. The city feeds the countryside with its own undoing, and that same country feeds the city back with grain. The cycles of consumption and casting away become a quiet pact, binding town and field in the intimate barter of survival. In taverns, a nightman might pause, wiping brimstone-stained hands onto a rag and accepting ale with a hand more calloused than any smith's. Few ask his name. Many rely on the vineyard, the hearth, the plough, the invisible hands that carry refuse far enough to be forgotten, even though forgetfulness can breed catastrophe. Everywhere, garbage is layered in streets like memory-discarded cloth, animal, dung, broken pottery, the peelings of market carts, can more bodies of waste pressing into the mud. By law, no one may toss their filth in the streets or into the river, but public decrees are adjectives until they are enacted. Citizens, worried or desperate, sometimes empty chamber pots over walls or into hidden drains. But markets post fines, cast waste improperly, and you pay in coin or in labor. The city tries to command its smell, to regulate its excrement. What it cannot do, it hides. Outside the walls, pits grow into mounds, and fields wait. The dance repeats. The gong farmer dumps his load. Fields drink the city's dregs. Soil grows wheat. Bread returns. The trade is silent, unspoken. It is both humanity's beauty and its brutality. Refuse reborn into the body above. The cart returns, wheels sunk in muck, but turning again toward home. Okay? At the rear, meat-laden carts and water-scoured vessels cross paths, sharing spaces that smell and shimmer with life's extremes. A child steps into daylight, unaware of the hidden labor outside her door. A widow fills a pot with fresh water, looking neither back nor ahead, only present. The dawn breaks fully. In the moment after nights, labor. The city breathes again, not clean, never clean, but a little more whole. And now, as the chapter turns, the edges of this decay meet fire's reach. Embers smolder in thatched roofs. Sparks threaten shutter and hearth. And the city's tenuous order trembles toward ruin. The mercy of cleanliness, the weight of waste day, pivot upon the threshold of flame. Smoke and sanitation both demand reckoning. And so, as the light rises, the next urgency coalesces, not in removal, but in rescue. A torch's flare curls upward, and in that flicker, a thatched rooftop ignites samber tongues, licking at dry straw. Smoke coils into the night, pressing on throats and shutters, while the city holds its breath. In that moment, the memory of water's failing mercy lies heavy above the flames. Crowds gather, drawn by the glow and the crackle of consumed timber. They know what must follow. No organized order, but human chains formed from desperation and loyalty. Buckets of water pass from hand to hand, full to empty. Full to empty each, link in the chain, a promise. I will throw my bucket so you may. Live. The rhythm of leather against rope, wood surging inside its gesture, is both prayer and resistance. Fire hooks are summoned long poles tipped with iron. Heavy as conviction, hands grip these tools, strained by the necessity of slowing. Fire as appetite. Hooked beams are wrenched down in devotions of destruction. Thatch collapses into the street in a cascade of embers. Each sacrifice is measured, one house brought down so the next may stand. Smoke swells, and the night air tastes of pitch and pleading. Above, bells toll, church bells and wardens' peals that call the community to its duty. The sound spreads like wind itself, a summons to unity. Men and women surge forward, blankets and swabs pressed to walls, mops soaked in water that seems to hiss against the heat. Torchlit faces go white with resolve, as if flame had stripped them of everything but shared survival. No station stands behind them. No captain directs. Only neighborhood memory. The recall of past smoke and char fuels their resolve. A brewer hands his leather bucket to a seamstress. A tailor unhooks fire hooks with hands calmed by craft. A father cradles his trembling child, his own heart hammering in fear that even water may betray them. Night stretches long. The fire roars. The bucket chain breathes. Its embers fall like morning petals. Each ember asterisk hiss is a reckoning. Yet the city's arms remain steady. At the edge of collapse, the blaze's hunger falters. Rain order falls like benediction, soft against ashes. The air cools and smoke unfurls its grip. In the ashes, a charred spoon glints on the cobblestone. A widow traces its rim with soot-dark fingertips, as if searching for continuity in loss. A boy clutches a scorched blanket, the fringe singed, his gaze on the battered streets that have held his footsteps. The city stands, wounded but breathing. Now arises the question, what happens when what we built with water and flame must be rebuilt? When the curve of hammer meets the grain of timber again, does the city rebuild only walls, or does it rebuild trust? The ruined hearth will need more than new beams. It will need new bargains, new law, new courage. As the night exhales, embers settle into shadow. The question left in the ash-laden street beckons. The city must now reckon with restoration. Who will rebuild? How they will guard against future flame, and whether the scars of fire will temper the next form of survival. A hush falls upon the ruin at dawn, the charred timbers still smoldering, but the city exhales. And with that breath begins an act of metamorphosis in the ashen light. The foundations stand like wounds, half-healed, telling of what was lost and what must be rebuilt. The walls are black as specters, windows hollow with absence. And amidst this ruin, gather those whose hands will write what comes next. Carpenters whose fingers know the grain of beams, masons whose palms still hold mortar's weight, and wardens who bear the ledger of law and equity. The city must now rise not identical, but stronger, rewritten in stone and guarded by intention, from hushed rooms in the guild hall to the open court in the square. As decisions are shaped over the hushed echoes of morning. Their words are not lofty. They are about brick, tile, rule, and trust. Some advocate for houses built in stone at the ground floor, tiled roofs rather than thatch, and for every household to stand ready with a full bucket of water and a ladder at their door, pledge against history, repeating its flame-laced violence. These are not mere suggestions. Their covenant, drawn in the ash of memory, as laws to govern both hearth and lane. Guilds, once bound to labor and trade, now forge the city's salvation. Carpenters sharpen axes at dawn, their strokes measured to echo one another. Masons mix mortar into limestones with care, a slow geometry that will shape the shelter of generations. Councilmen and wardens walk between them, marking boundaries, measuring street widths, and debating the loom of alley and lane. The judgment is clear. Narrow, winding ways bred disaster. Broad, resilient streets might contain it, even as resolution hardens into building law. Voices of memory anchor each plank and stone. My father's house, one mason whispers, was lost to flame. Now it must not rise in kind. Carpenter imagines the timbers of his apprenticeship, burned and forgotten. Let these new beams bear not only roofs, but resolve. Its walls shape up from ash. Families wander through the skeletons of new rooms. A mother runs her palm over the cool face of new stone. A child places a finger in fresh mortar, watching the imprint dim. The city is alive again in these gestures, finding hope in scaffolding, faith in brick, and shared meaning in the curve of a rebuilt arch. In the hush between hammer blows, the city listens. It remembers the sorrow of loss, the terror of fire, the shame of its own refuse, and now it charts a new covenant with its bones. The ordinances may teach restraint, the walls teach solidity, and the water and waste still teach humility, but here and now. New walls teach future. The last light rests on new rooftops, sober, unwavering. A church bell rings, not in alarm but in benediction, calling the city toward its next life. Mortar dries with promise. From ruin, a structure rises that carries not only stone, but conscience. A pale morning light seeps through mist into the square, where shadows of newly built rooftops linger against walls still warm with kiln-dried tiles. In this hush, deep and solemn, the city exhales its past, the memory of water, of smoke, of refuse, of flames, carried now within its seams. These streets, reborn in stone and law, bear scars that are not yet healed, and the pulse of memory runs beneath each arch. The city convenes here not in guild hall or council chamber, but among passers-by and laborers, lingering by stone thresholds in the new waterspouts that line widened lanes. In their silence lies a negotiation. Who will guard the new conduits? Who will tend the gutters and purify the wells again when rot returns? The city remembers how thin the boundary stands between life and decay, between order and collapse. Face holds that memory, unspoken, but binding all in purpose. New ordinances are not delivered from pedantic speech, but scribed into thresholds and carved into conduits. Every household must clear its front each dawn. Every lane must flow, not stagnate. Privies must stand a measured stride from water. And every street must listen for the first cough of sickness. These rules are less law than incantations of survival whispered into masonry. Among the rebuilding, women polish spouts with linen, their hands kneaded raw yet tender, remembering how water tastes in thirst and in peace. Children draw in chalk on fresh stone, the emblem of a bucket, the arc of a conduit, the curve of a gutter. They mark with innocent precision the geometry of necessity. Their drawings are not game, but sacred shapes, signs that they to bear witness to the covenant between flesh and infrastructure. Meanwhile, watchmen walk lanes newly paved, senses sharpened by years of backing smoke and decay. Their lanterns light the clean streets, and behind each window, someone remembers the trembling of burning timbers, the fear that water may fail, that refuse may fester unchecked, Yet now they breathe deepest, knowing that the embers of past ruin have molded their future in the marketplace. The conduit is no longer just water. It is memory made visible. People touch the spout with reverent hands, echoing those of ancestors who once cupped water from the same stone. They talk softly about the price paid, not only in coin, but in shared fear, in labor, in endurance. Trust flows again here, as tangible as water, in that lingering stillness. A bell tolls the church bell, or perhaps a ward's bell, no matter calling the city to its next act. Not to defend, not to regulate, but to remember, to hold memory as architecture, as custom, as light and shadow, and as the morning rises fully, a child steps to the spout and drinks. The water tastes of stone and remembrance. A neighbor closes a ledger. A broom sweeps the last ash from a threshold. And above, clean roofs catch sunlight with promise. Now the city stands not just rebuilt, but mindful. Its bones carry both fire and flow. But memory asks, what will the city do when calm slips into complacency? When the good habits of water, waste, and law fade like soot in rain? Will the past guide the future, or will forgetfulness invite collapse again? A resistant hush settles over the city at dawn, the embers of past conflagrations finally extinguished. In this delicate light, the streets stand transformed, not merely rebuilt, but rewritten. Each stone, each conduit, each widened avenue is an inscription of memory etched into the lungs of the city. It's the passage of water through new spouts, the angle of roof tiles tiled firm against flame, the curvature of a newly paved gutter. All speak of what was lost and what the people vowed never to forget. The citizens gather, not in halls of decree, but at thresholds and conduits beneath arches of new masons' work. In their unspoken assembly, the city breathes its covenant. A mother examines the spout's cool stone. Her hands trace the grooves that once channeled life or carried away death. Children follow her gesture, learning the anatomy of safety in the geometry of water and earth. Their fingers imprint symbols of survival. It's almost as if the city itself were teaching them the grammar of vigilance. Guilds and wardens walk these streets, inspecting the narrow lanes chosen to hold remembrance as much as traffic. The conduits are honored not as innovations, but as relics recharged. Water flows steady, but not naive. The conduits echo names of dawners. It's the memory of hands that once labored with adze and pitched joints, whose toil still stands hidden beneath mortar and moss, but alive in every drop. The gravity-fed pipes, the sealed joints. The rainfall catches each embedded line a stanza in the city's ongoing poem. In taverns and byways, talk turns 2 days before the flame, before the collapse of custom, before the tunnels of waste lay beneath silence. Older voices remember nights they passed, drawing water by lantern fear draped like smoke over gabled rooftops. They recall the hammer's echo after ash, the scent of pitch, the hush of alarm at bell. But now they speak also of trust, how it rebuilt chimneys and healed brick scars, how a neighbor's bucket was the hinge of a life saved. Memory permeates law as well as architecture, in written ordinances now recited in market squares and thresholds. Runs the pulse of communal caution. Keep the gutter clear, tend the spout, bury refuse in ordered earth. House the ladder and bucket in every roof's eave. The laws are not commands, but promises, etched in mortar and backed by blood and sweat and architecture of moral memory. As midday sun filters through arches, the city's new face reflects something deeper. Not denial of the past, but preservation of it. Rebuilt walls are not walls of forgetting, but membranes of memory, porous, alive. Stories flow in their veins, stories of how water once failed, how flames once consumed, how the refuse once pooled in shame, and how, each time, the city fashioned its survival from silence, from labor, from shared vow. The hush swells into a hush of promise. The bells no longer toll in alarm, but ring in melody of endurance, not only the ring of warning, but the echo of resilience. The inhabitants stand still, listening to their own breath in the streets, their hearts aligned with the pulse of conduits, drains, roof tiles, stones. They have forged not only buildings, but a living memory that undergirds life. And now, in this last turning, question lingers like incense in the newly cleaned air. When the calm finally settles and the threat seems distant, will the city remember to guard its water, its waste, its fire? Will memory remain alive, a ritual in everyday gestures, in held breath at a spout, in the careful sweep of gutters at dawn?